In 2008, NASA had an intriguing question. How do spiders construct their webs in zero gravity? Therefore, they sent 2 spiders to the International Space Station. The first spider was the main participant, while the second served as a backup in case the first one didn't survive. However, things didn't go according to plan. The backup spider managed to escape from its chamber and visited its companion, resulting in a bit of a mess. They built tangled webs that interfered with each other. As if that wasn't enough, the flies that were supposed to be food for the spiders started reproducing faster than anticipated. Their larvae escaped from their container and covered the front window of the chamber. Over time, the spiders were completely hidden behind the larvae. Although this initial experiment didn't go well, one of the researchers involved in planning the spider experiment was still curious. In 2011, she got another opportunity to repeat the same experiment. This time, she sought assistance from other researchers. They decided to send a different species of spider into space and prepared 4 spiders, 2 for the ISS and 2 for Earth, allowing for result comparison. The goal was to expose the spiders to varying gravity conditions and observe their behavior. However, another twist appeared in the story. Initially, they believed they had 4 female spiders, but it turned out that 2 of them were actually males. Determining the sex of young spiders can be tricky, but fortunately, one male had already been sent to space, while the other remained on Earth, enabling valuable data collection. The second experiment proved successful. The spiders were active. They built and dismantled webs, and even without the assistance of gravity, they spun new ones. 3 cameras captured thousands of pictures, showcasing their hard work on the webs. Interestingly, it seemed that spiders created significantly more symmetrical webs in space than on Earth. The center of the webs was closer to the middle, and surprisingly, the spiders didn't always position their heads downward as they typically do on Earth. However, one significant factor made all the difference: light. When the spiders on the ISS had a source of light, they weaved asymmetrical webs, similar to those found on our home planet. Light played a crucial role in orienting the spiders in space. The chamber's lamps were attached at the top. If the lights had been positioned differently, for example on the side, it would have been challenging to observe the effect of light on the symmetry of webs in zero gravity. When the lights were turned off, the spiders rested in random orientations within their webs. Yet with the lights on, they would orient themselves away from the light source, which meant downward. Hence, in the absence of gravity, light assisted them in orientation. This discovery was unexpected, because spiders can typically build their webs in the dark and capture prey effectively, even without light. Spider's web itself is such a cool thing wherever they are. It's like these creatures have small silk production factories inside them. Within their body, a thread is stored in the form of a highly concentrated liquid. And a regular garden spider can produce up to 7 different types of silk, each having a unique combination of proteins. Each type of silk has a different purpose. For example, one type of thread makes the web elastic, which means the web absorbs the impact when insects collide with it. Another type of silk makes the thread flexible and strong, so it's more difficult to break. Some proteins found in the silk protect it from harmful bacteria and fungi, allowing the web to last longer. They also keep the silk moist so it doesn't dry out. Wow, imagine having a home where you don't have to buy anything extra to maintain it. Spider silk is lighter than cotton and incredibly thin, up to 1,000 times thinner than human hair. But it's also insanely strong. I mean, it must be, since that's what they rely on while living their everyday life. Whether they're preying on some wandering insect or trying to resist heavy rain and wind. But you wouldn't expect it to be stronger than steel, right? Of course, in reality, you don't come across steel that thin. But if you could find a piece with the same weight as spider silk, you'd see that it has similar strength when pulled or stretched. In fact, spider silk is 5 times stronger than steel of the same thickness. Spider silk is also super stretchy, able to stretch up to 4 times its original length without breaking. Plus, it remains strong even in freezing temperatures below -40 degrees F. The most common type of spider is the orb weaver. They're masters at building those webs you keep seeing in open areas. That's where they have a better chance to catch a tasty lunch. But since they choose such spots, their webs are more prone to damage. That's why these spiders have a fascinating habit. They often rebuild their entire webs every day, even if the current web seems perfectly fine. I wish I was this dedicated to maintaining my bedroom. These spiders actually do this because they want to be prepared for the evening when they patiently wait for their potential prey to get caught in their carefully set trap. At first, this might seem like a waste of time. After all, they need to invest a significant amount of protein to produce the silk that forms their webs. But even if an orb weaver spider doesn't catch its meal overnight, it usually has enough silk proteins to dismantle its old web and build a new one for the following night. As the spider removes the old web, it consumes the silk at the same time, and by doing that, recycles the proteins it contains. If you've ever observed a spider on its web, you must have noticed how attentively it responds to even the slightest vibrations. It turns out that spider silk can be finely adjusted to different sound frequencies, unlike any other material. When a spider builds its web, it doesn't just spin the silk and leave it as it is. The spider actually makes adjustments to the silk by changing how tight or loose it is, and how different threads are connected. This way, it creates a web that can vibrate or make different kinds of sounds. The spider is like a musician tuning their guitar. This feather-legged lace weaver is called the garden center spider because it mostly enjoys humid greenhouse conditions, and it has a really cool way of catching insects. Instead of spinning sticky webs like other spiders, it uses electricity. It produces incredibly thin silk, almost at the nanoscale. And on its hind legs, this spider has special hairs that act like tiny combs. As the silk emerges from its body, the spider uses these hairs to comb and manipulate the silk. And here's where the magic happens. This process generates an electric charge. The threads of the silk are now crackling with electricity, so they come together to form little poofs that resemble fluffy balls of wool. These electrically charged poofs are a great way to trap innocent insects wandering around. When unsuspecting prey comes into contact with them, the electric charge causes the threads to cling to their bodies, making it almost impossible to get away. Female Darwin's bark spiders make gigantic webs that can stretch over rivers and lakes, which means they can reach over 80 feet across. It turns out such enormous webs are just a part of their genius plan to catch their prey. A super strong web that goes across the water like a bridge can capture large insects that gracefully fly above the water's surface, like dragonflies, and it's an impressive project that takes days to construct. These special lines go across the river and anchor the web firmly to each bank. There's no easy way out of this.
We interrupt this program to bring you this important message. The Earth is no longer fit for living, so you'll need to find your own new home. You immediately get the brilliant idea to apply for a job as an astronaut. You'll be able to wait over the hustle and bustle on the International Space Station until humanity finds a new home, right? The longest time a human has spent in space so far is 437 days and a few extra hours. And when I say in space, I mean the ISS, because a human being without the proper equipment in open space would only last a few seconds. The ISS is designed to support human life in space for extended periods of time. Extended, but not endless. The station gets resupplied with food, water, air, fuel, scientific equipment, and other necessities every 3 months. With no Earth or humans to send the mission, this lifeline will soon be broken. The station is a huge ship moving through space at over 17,000 miles per hour. It faces pretty harsh conditions, from radiation to micrometeoroids and huge temperature ups and downs. That's why the system regularly needs patching up. In addition to wear and tear, there are also unexpected events that can require resupply missions. In 2020, the crew discovered a leak that was causing a gradual loss of air pressure. They eventually found cracks in one of the modules. The crew managed to fix it, but it proves how important it is to have enough spare parts on board. Let's say the future humans will manage to find a way to run the station non-stop without restocking. Astronauts already grow plants in space in closed boxes with low-energy LED lights. It's not only a source of vitamins, without which humans can't survive, but a great mood booster. We'd also need more advanced closed-loop life support systems to recycle air and water efficiently. It's a system that captures carbon dioxide from the air by passing it through small beads. Then it uses steam to separate the carbon dioxide and transform it into methane and water. Water then divides back into oxygen. But even with all the possible advances, there's another problem: the health of the astronauts. They live and work in a microgravity environment, and they rely on carefully controlled life support systems. But our bodies aren't designed to live in weightlessness forever. It's like standing on your head, because the reduced gravity makes bodily fluids accumulate in the upper parts of your body. The result is a puffy red face. The gravitational force on the ISS is weaker than on Earth, so muscles don't have to work as hard and bones gradually lose their density. That's why each crew member follows a strict daily exercise routine. The heart muscle also weakens because it doesn't have to use as much effort to circulate blood throughout the body. Without Earth's protective atmosphere, astronauts are continuously exposed to cosmic rays. They are invisible waves that can cause some serious health issues. So maybe we're better off opting for Mars or the Moon for an alternative home.
The first trip intending to land on the Moon made by human mammals took 3 days, 3 hours, and 49 minutes. The Apollo 11 astronauts needed to travel some 240,000 miles to get there. Their plan was to touch down on a place on the Moon called the Sea of Tranquility because it had good visibility and the terrain there was pretty smooth. Well, up until the last few moments of the flight, when all these big craters appeared that they had to avoid, they finally landed with just 30 seconds of fuel left. Ooh, that's called cutting it close. Hey, how would you like to land in your jetliner with only 30 seconds of fuel left? So, now you know. Later that day, July 20th, 1969, Neil Armstrong stepped onto the lunar soil, saying, "That's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind." The astronauts were planning to sleep before the first moonwalk, but they chose to go outside earlier than scheduled. They obviously couldn't sleep. I mean, could you? Since that first visit, our lunar satellite has accumulated quite a collection of memorabilia from Earth. Let's look at some of the most important and weird stuff that humans have left on the Moon. Take footprints, for starters. I know they're not technically objects, but the marks left by Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin do show that humans have been there, just in case someone or something else drops by. Since the Moon doesn't have any wind or rain, the footprints should still be relatively untouched. NASA put in a lot of effort to make sure these footprints stay protected, as well as the location of the initial Moon landing. Rules were set into place for future missions to make sure they wouldn't alter the initial site, as it's an important piece of history, kind of like a national park that you can't get to. Now, astronaut Charles Duke wanted to leave a photo of his family on the surface of the Moon. If that didn't make him the best dad ever, I don't know what would. He did take his family to the Moon, right? On the back of the picture, he wrote that he had come from Earth. He also added the date when he landed on the Moon, which was April 20th, 1972. Now, there's a good chance that his family is no longer visible in the picture today. Because of the exposure to strong solar radiation, the colors in the photo have likely faded away by now. To this day, Charles Duke remains the youngest person to visit our Moon. He was 36 years old at the time of his mission. Now, there are many flags on the surface of the Moon too, but the flags left there must have had a similar fate to Duke's photo. They're most likely discolored by now. During each lunar landing, a flag was planted as a tradition started by Apollo 11. This tradition continued with all future Apollo missions. The flags were made using metal poles to stretch the flag out so they could be seen on the Moon. But since there's no wind, they never move. Back in the 1600s, astronomer Galileo Galilei dropped two objects of different weights from the Leaning Tower of Pisa to show that the speed of the fall would be the same. In 1971, astronaut David Scott repeated the experiment on the Moon and proved Galileo's theory correct. He dropped a feather and a hammer at the same time, and as predicted, they both landed on the Moon's surface simultaneously. Fun fact, the feather came from the Air Force Academy's Falcon mascot named Baffin, with its permission, of course. These objects were both left on the lunar surface. Now, what about art pieces on the moon? We've left some of those out there as well. The Fallen Astronaut sculpture was made by a Belgian artist and left behind by the astronauts of the Apollo 15 mission. It was a small statue requested by David Scott, the head of the mission. Scott said the statue was to memorialize the astronauts and cosmonauts who gave their lives for the advancement of space exploration. Meanwhile, astronaut Alan Shepard even played some golf on the moon during his mission on Apollo 14. He brought a golf club head, yes, he got permission first, and attached it to a tool. Then he tried to hit 2 golf balls. Hey, it's hard to do in a clunky spacesuit. He did better on the second one. It's safe to say that he didn't bring the golf balls back, and they should still be there on the moon. There's yet a message from Queen Elizabeth II there. The monarch prepared a message which accompanied Neil and Buzz to Tranquility Base during the Apollo 11 mission. It was written on a tiny disc the size of a coin and also featured messages from over 70 other leaders from all over the world. I'll bet the printing was really small. Her message said she was proud of the astronauts and their accomplishments and hoped their journey would benefit all of humanity. The disc was then placed where Armstrong and his team first landed on the moon. After they returned, they met the Queen at Buckingham Palace. Their encounter was memorable too. Neil Armstrong almost couldn't speak to the Queen at all because he had a cold. Another astronaut named Mike Collins was so nervous about the protocol, he almost fell down the stairs. Now, some objects that exist today on the moon weren't left there on purpose. One of the most interesting moments of the Apollo 11 mission was when Neil and Buzz were getting ready to go back to Earth. They had to chuck everything they didn't need so they wouldn't be weighed down at liftoff. They also needed to store all the rock samples they had gathered from the lunar surface. This created a toss zone that archaeologists could potentially study one day. Waste like this acts as a timeline for Earth's history, but it can also help us understand what happens to objects that spend a lot of time on the surface of the moon. Now, most astronauts became pretty sentimental when strolling on the lunar dust, and who could blame them? They were thousands of miles away from their families. So that's why, in 1972, NASA astronaut Eugene Cernan wrote his daughter's initials, TDC, in the dust on the moon, and gave a speech before leaving. He said, "We leave as we came, and hopefully we'll return with peace and hope for all." Unfortunately, this marked the end of the Apollo lunar missions. Technically, his daughter's initials should still be there on the surface of the moon, just like all the astronauts' footprints. Can you believe it's been more than 50 years since people started exploring the moon? No worries though, as NASA's been preparing for future lunar explorations for quite some time. This new mission is called Artemis, and it aims to build some sort of settlement out there. This way, the moon can be studied in safe conditions for longer periods of time. For starters, NASA launched Orion, a spacecraft without a crew on board, to orbit the moon and come back to Earth. This was a test drive. Before NASA transports people to the moon again using newer technology, all safety measures need to be worked out and confirmed. But one day soon, Orion is going to take astronauts back to the moon. One cool thing about this spacecraft is that it comes with a launch abort system, which is meant to keep astronauts safe in case something goes bad during the launch. It also features a special service module, which is like a battery that fuels and propels Orion through space. It also supplies astronauts with water, oxygen, and power, and provides temperature control. But Artemis also looks to build a long-term human settlement on our satellite somewhere around the 2030s. However, searching for a cozy place on the moon isn't as easy as you'd think. Thankfully, NASA specialists produced an ingenious idea. They found some lava tubes on the surface of the moon, and they have pretty steady temperatures inside. The main problem with the first moon landing back in 1969 was extreme temperature fluctuations. So these caves might be the perfect solution. Not only is the temperature in there suitable for humans, but they could also help shield astronauts from cosmic rays, solar radiation, and meteorites. It's also good news that we have similar structures here on Earth. Before we get back to space, we can study them to better understand those found on the moon. Here on Earth, these holes form once the top of a stream of lava solidifies, and the molten rock inside drains away, creating this tube.
It's dark outside, almost 2 a.m. You go outside and look at the sky, and here it is, bright, full moon. You might think you know a lot about Earth's natural satellite, but let me ask you this: how did it form? The answer is nobody knows. But of course, there are theories. The most popular one, called the giant impact theory, claims that the moon formed during a collision between Earth and another planet. This planet must have been smaller than ours, the size of Mars, and the collision itself probably happened around 4.5 billion years ago. Another theory, called the capture theory, claims that the moon used to be an asteroid or some other wandering body. It formed somewhere else in the solar system. When it was passing by Earth, it got caught by our planet's gravity. But here is one catch. Our planet and the moon have remarkable isotopic and chemical similarities. So, they must have a linked history, which means the moon couldn't have been created elsewhere. Other experts think that at some point in the past, Earth was spinning so fast that some of its material broke away. It soon started to orbit our planet. That's how the moon appeared in the sky. But again, there's one problem. In this case, the proportion and type of minerals on the moon would have to be the same as on Earth. But there are slight differences. The moon is richer in materials that form very fast at high temperatures. There's one more theory, and it's probably the least exciting. It claims that Earth's natural satellite could simply appear along with Earth during our planet's formation. Duh! But these days, a more urgent question keeps astronomers busy. Is the moon really Earth's satellite? Or are these two twin planets? The moon is big compared to our planet, about 1/4 of Earth's size. That's why some experts refer to our planetary system as a double planet. But how correct is that? If we want to figure it out, we need to give the definition to the word planet. According to the International Astronomical Union, a planet is a space body that orbits the Sun, is massive enough to have a nearly round shape thanks to its gravity, and has cleared the region around its orbit. Now, what about a satellite? It's an object in space that orbits around a larger celestial body. If we take the system Earth, the Moon, its center of gravity, called a barycenter, is inside the Earth. That's why at the moment we can't say that we live in a twin planet system. According to this definition, the Moon is the satellite of our planet. Now, let's get back to the past, like 3 or 4 billion years ago. Even though the Moon wasn't a planet, it most likely had a full-fledged atmosphere. It formed at times when powerful volcanic eruptions were rocking our satellite. Gases spread all over the Moon's surface, and it happened so fast that they didn't have enough time to escape into space. At that time, the lunar surface was covered with basins filled with volcanic basalt. Just imagine ginormous plumes of magma hurtling high into the air, falling to the ground and creating lava flows. That's how the basalt basins appeared on the surface of the Moon. At one point, scientists got their hands on samples brought from the Moon. They found out that lava flows there contained not only carbon monoxide and sulfur, but also the building blocks of water. Thanks to these samples, researchers managed to calculate the amount of gas that rose and formed the atmosphere. It became the thickest around 3.5 billion years ago and existed for about 70 million years. After that, poof, the atmosphere was lost in space. But the coolest thing? When the Moon did have an atmosphere, the satellite was 3 to 10 times closer to our planet. One computer simulation even suggests the Moon was probably up to 19 times closer than it is now. The distance between it and our planet could be 18,600 miles, while these days our satellite is around 240,000 miles away. That's why the Moon looked much, much bigger in the sky. Unfortunately, at that time, not even dinos were around to admire the view. These days, the atmosphere of the Moon is almost non-existent, and that's why the satellite can't protect itself from meteorites. The surface of the Moon is dotted with craters. For comparison, There are about 190 identified impact craters on our planet. Many of them are hidden by vegetation or covered with water. But if we speak about the moon, the number is so much greater, several million, and around 5,000 of them are more than 12 miles across. And since the moon is less seismically active than Earth, these craters and other ancient formations stay in perfect condition for centuries. When you look at the moon, it's the brightest object in the night sky. But in reality, its surface is dark because the reflectance of our natural satellite is just a bit higher than that of asphalt. You might know that the moon's gravitational pull causes tides on our planet, making the oceans bulge out on both the side closest to the moon and the one farthest from the satellite. But that's not all. The moon also slows down Earth's rotation. This phenomenon is known as tidal braking. It increases the length of a day on Earth by a bit more than 2 milliseconds per 100 years. The moon is also moving away from Earth at the same rate at which your fingernails grow. That's about 1.5 inches per year. If one day the moon floats away into space, our planet will have to live through tough times. Without the stabilizing pull of the moon's gravity, Earth's tilt would start changing wildly, from no tilt at all, meaning no seasons, to a large tilt, resulting in extreme weather. Even though the moon's surface is mostly dormant, Earth's natural satellite still experiences moonquakes. One theory suggests that they may be happening because the moon is shrinking as its insides are cooling. Scientists say that the moon has become around 150 feet skinnier than it used to be several hundred million years ago. To help you understand it, picture a grape turning into a raisin. It wrinkles while shrinking. The same is happening to the moon. It's shrinking and it's wrinkling. But unlike the grape, the moon doesn't have flexible skin. Its surface is hard and brittle, so as the moon gets smaller, the crust cracks and breaks, and its sections get pushed over neighboring parts. Want to know another cool thing about the moon? A recent study claims that it has a tail. And every month it wraps around our planet like a scarf. This slender tail is made up of millions of atoms of sodium. And our planet regularly travels directly through it. Meteor strikes blast these sodium atoms out of the moon's surface and further into space. For several days every month, the moon remains between the sun and our planet. That's when Earth's gravity picks that sodium tail. Our planet drags it into a long stripe that wraps around its atmosphere. This lunar tail is totally harmless. It's also invisible to the human eye, 50 times dimmer than what you can perceive. But during those rare days, high-powered telescopes can spot its faint yellowish glow in the sky. The tail looks like a gleaming spot that's 5 times the full moon's diameter. And the spiciest fact for you, 2 or 3 years ago, an asteroid was pulled into Earth's orbit and started to travel around the planet. Even though it was no larger than an average car, it was still a big deal. Out of more than 1 million asteroids astronomers know about, it was only the second one to orbit our planet, called 2020 CD3. It was our temporary mini-moon. It didn't stay with Earth for long, though. The asteroid followed a random orbit and slowly drifted away. Temporarily captured objects such as 2020 CD3 are rare. They need to have a specific direction and speed to be caught by Earth's gravitational pull. Otherwise, they either crash into the planet or fly in another direction.
NASA has some incredible plans for the moon. For example, their next ambitious lunar program, Artemis II. They've set their sights on landing astronauts, including the first woman and the next man, on the moon by 2024. Artemis is all about building a sustainable presence on the moon. They're planning to establish a lunar gateway, a sort of space station in lunar orbit, which will serve as a jumping-off point for lunar landings. And let's not forget about the cool lunar landers. Scientists are developing the mighty Space Launch System rocket, which will launch the Orion spacecraft carrying astronauts towards the moon. Then there's the Human Landing System, a snazzy lunar lander that will gently touch down on the moon's surface, allowing astronauts to explore and conduct amazing scientific experiments. And NASA isn't going alone this time. They're teaming up with international partners, like the European Space Agency, to make this lunar dream a reality. But all these wonderful dreams might be ruined by something that seems super small and insignificant at first. Picture this: no atmosphere, no air to breathe, and suddenly, a mysterious haze and radiant beams of light appear at sunrise and sunset. It's as if the moon is putting on a celestial show. But there is a twist to this beauty. During the Apollo 17 mission in 1972, this beautiful sight made one of the NASA astronauts, Harrison Schmitt, sneeze and made his eyes water. He called it lunar hay fever. This mysterious fever affected all 12 moonwalkers. From sneezing fits to stuffy noses, those astronauts experienced symptoms as if they caught a cold. It took days for the reactions to fade away. This event led to a discovery about lunar dust and its darker side. When scientists found out about these rays, they rolled up their sleeves and delved into their origins. And here's what they discovered. Those radiant bands of light were actually caused by sunlight sneaking through layers of teeny tiny lunar dust. The dust was composed of small particles and sharp glass shards and was lurking everywhere. And it turned out that this lunar dust was a sneaky villain. It brought a whole host of problems. Astronauts who found themselves with impaired vision were just the beginning. The troublemaker went even further, damaging precious machinery and causing electronic malfunctions. It even had the audacity to corrode components and smelled like burnt gunpowder inside the spacecraft. Yikes. It clings to everything, coating surfaces like a mischievous blanket. It can clog up equipment, get into delicate machinery, and even mess with astronauts' spacesuits. In 1972, things got really hairy again. The Apollo 17 astronauts faced a nightmare. After just 22 hours of gallivanting on the lunar surface, their spacesuits suffered irreparable damage. Yes, you heard that right. Irreparable. The dust diminished astronauts' mobility, making it harder for them to move around and perform their moonwalks with grace. And no matter how hard they tried to clean it off, it clung on for dear life, leaving the spacesuits in a sorry state. So, as you can see, it poses some serious challenges for future moon missions. But our intrepid scientists aren't giving up. To solve this problem, they have to understand how lunar dust forms and why it's so darn clingy. They found out that it all begins with meteorite impacts. When these space rocks crash into the moon, they generate a fine dust that fills the air. Sometimes these impacts even cause minerals to melt, forming sharp glass shards that mix with the dust. Talk about a moon makeover. The dust is also filled with silicate, a material commonly found on volcanic planets. Silicate inhalation can cause serious lung problems for Earth's miners, so you can imagine the trouble it can cause on the moon. A recent study found that even a scoop of replica moon dust was toxic enough to destroy up to 90% of lung and brain cells exposed to it. But it gets worse. The low gravity on the moon allows those tiny particles to float around for much longer, penetrating deeper into the lungs. Imagine breathing particles 50 times smaller than a human hair for months. That's a recipe for trouble. And you see, on the moon's surface, things are a bit different than here. There are no rainstorms or strong gusts of wind to blow this dust away. There is also no atmosphere to protect the surface. So without the natural forces of wind and water erosion like we have on Earth, these dry particles stick around persistently. And to make matters more electrifying, the moon is constantly showered by radiation from the sun. This exposure gives the dust an electric charge. The solar winds create positively and negatively charged particles. The particles then buzz around, repelling each other and giving rise to those radiant bands of light that the Apollo 8 astronauts witnessed. It's like a disco party on the moon. ESA, the European Space Agency, has gathered a team of experts to study the lunar dust. They're working with simulated moon dust mined from a volcanic region in Germany to understand its behavior and effects. Engineers also need to find a way to protect future astronauts and equipment. Engineers in NASA want to create spacesuits that can survive not 1, not 10, but a whopping 100 extravehicular activities on the lunar surface. That's like spending 800 hours out there, exploring and having a blast. Besides that, NASA initiated the Breakthrough, Innovative, and Game-Changing Idea Challenge in 2021. It was open to clever university students from all over the world. These young minds put their thinking caps on and unleashed a wave of innovative solutions. For example, they proposed using special fibers that conduct electricity, inspired by fluffy chinchilla hair. Just like how chinchillas stay dust-free, These fibers would help keep the lunar dust at bay. A furry friend lending a helping paw, isn't that adorable? Another bright idea involved an electrically charged brush activated by UV radiation. It's like a magical wand that zaps away the dust with a flick. Abracadabra, lunar dust be gone. And let's not forget the fabric inspired by clever insects. These insects have pollen-collecting structures that repel unwanted dust. So our ingenious students thought, why not mimic that? They designed a fabric with similar properties, creating a shield against the sneaky lunar particles. What's remarkable about these ideas is that they all use the power of charge to fight the dust. They cleverly repel it from the spacesuits, keeping them clean and protected. And even though all these ideas sound pretty great, scientists in NASA unleashed another, even better solution: carbon nanotubes. It's a great way to revolutionize spacesuit fabric. What makes these carbon nanotubes so special? Well, they possess some amazing superpowers. First off, they're superconductive, meaning they can carry electricity like nobody's business. It's like having a lightning bolt trapped inside a microscopic tube. Not only that, but these carbon nanotubes are tougher than the toughest meteors. They have the strength to withstand the harsh lunar environment, where even a speck of dust can cause trouble. Imagine having a suit made of a material that's stronger than Superman's cape. So, NASA's scientists decided to weave these extraordinary carbon nanotubes into the spacesuit fabric. The electrodes were carefully integrated into the outer layer of the fabric, making it a force to be reckoned with. But how do they banish the lunar dust? Well, here comes electrifying science again. When activated by a special alternating current, the electrodes create powerful electric fields. These fields work like magnets, repelling both charged and uncharged dust particles away from the spacesuit. Picture this like a dance party, where the dust particles are the uninvited guests, and the electric fields are the bouncers, swiftly escorting them out. Thanks to this technology, lunar dust doesn't stand a chance against our astronauts. Also on the bright side, the lunar soil can be used to make bricks for shelters. It can also help extract oxygen for astronauts to survive on the moon for long periods of time. When life gives you lemons, make a lemonade, right? So, let's cheer on our NASA Dream Team as they embark on this epic lunar quest. Let's hope that they succeed in their findings, and the next moon mission won't be a big problem. Stay tuned.
Recently, Chinese scientists discovered something interesting on the moon, an unusual crystal. Moreover, they found out that this crystal contains an element that can literally replace nuclear fuel. Let's find out more. The composition of the moon has long remained a mystery to us. Half a century has already passed since the Apollo mission. Unfortunately, we haven't traveled to the moon much since then, so it's not surprising that it's not so easy for us to study it. But recently, we've made a breakthrough in this area. In December 2020, Chinese scientists sent the Chang'e 5 probe to the moon. The mission was named after the ancient Chinese deity of the moon, Chang'e. Quite poetic, isn't it? Anyway, after the probe went to the nearest side of the moon, it spent several days digging through the surface and rocks, and then returned to Earth. In total, it collected about 4 pounds of various lunar rocks, like basalt, solidified lava, and so on. And yeah, maybe it doesn't sound too impressive, but it's actually a mini breakthrough. After all, we hadn't received any lunar samples since 1976. And these samples are very important for learning the history of our world. We've been struggling for many years to find out, for example, how the moon was born at all. Yes, there were a lot of theories, but we still couldn't find any proper evidence for any of them. But thanks to the latest missions and some computer simulations, scientists finally found out the truth. The moon was born when some random dwarf planet crashed into our Earth many millions of years ago. This dwarf planet was slightly smaller than Mars. The fragments of the Earth went into space, but some of them stayed in our orbit. Then they stuck together and formed the moon. It sounds horrifying, but in reality, the birth of the moon was the best thing to ever happen to our planet. If it weren't for this beautiful satellite, all our oceans would be small puddles. Life wouldn't have appeared on Earth at all. So this is already an amazing discovery, but that's still not all. Studying the collected rocks, scientists from the Beijing Research Institute discovered something unusual, a rare lunar crystal. Looks pretty boring, doesn't it? Just some tiny transparent monocrystal about the thickness of a human hair. We've already found such things on the moon before. These crystals were formed as a result of volcanic activity, just like some garnets on the Earth. And yep, the place where they discovered these crystals also suffered from volcanoes 1.2 billion years ago. That means that this tiny baby is over 1 billion years old. But that's not the most important thing. It's the fact that this crystal is made of a unique material, the one that we've never seen before. Researchers from the International Mineralogical Association have confirmed that such a composition can't be found anywhere on Earth. The crystal was named chongasite, again after the same moon deity. And this is another achievement. This is the 6th previously unknown mineral that we've found on the moon and the first one found by China. Now, it has become the 3rd country in the world to make such a lunar discovery. However, this tiny crystal still wasn't the only remarkable thing they found. After studying this gem and about 140,000 other lunar particles, scientists have discovered something else. They found helium-3. Why is it so important? Because this is one of the elements that feed the sun and other stars in our universe. We tend to say stuff like, put out the sun is burning, and so on. And this is one of the reasons why many people actually think that the sun is a huge fireball. But it's not. Its burning is actually a completely different process, which is called nuclear fusion. The process itself is quite simple. During this reaction, hydrogen in the star turns into helium. But this simple process is actually one of the most violent and insane reactions in the universe. There's a real boiling broth of particles inside the sun. The hydrogen nuclei that jump and rush there are constantly repelling each other since all of them are positively charged. And so they could continue to boil and chill around without bothering anyone if it weren't for the stars. The stars turned out to be cheaters. They have such strong gravity that they basically grab billions of these little atoms and squeeze them together. Combining with each other, these atoms create new heavy elements, like the mentioned helium. And when this happens, they throw a lot of energy into space. And that's how the sun burns. At the same time, it spreads so much energy that we can't even imagine. Okay, so what is helium-3? Well, this is an element to which even the sun can say, "Whoa, dude, you should calm down." The fusion of helium-3 atoms releases even more energy than in typical nuclear fusion. And most importantly, it doesn't pollute the atmosphere with harmful things like radiation. We have very, very little helium-3 on Earth. Its prevalence in our atmosphere is about 1 in a million. And besides, it's constantly trying to escape from us back into space. Probably feels some bad vibes from us. However, scientists have recently found out that there's a place that contains a lot of this element. Yep, you guessed it, it's the moon. We think that there's more helium-3 on the moon than on Earth because of the solar winds. The sun has been hammering on the moon with its helium-3 for billions of years, so now it's all over the place. It's still not too much if you compare it, for example, with Jupiter or Saturn. But don't forget how much energy it can release. For your information, with only 25 tons of helium-3, it's possible to provide America with energy for an entire year. Now, there are 35,000 tons of it here on Earth, and more than 1 million tons on the moon. Only these sources could feed the entire US for thousands of years. So basically, in the future, helium-3 may become a new source of fuel. And it's better than nuclear fuel in basically everything. Helium-3 won't leave any harmful waste and radiation. It's more powerful and not that dangerous. In other words, this environmentally friendly and efficient energy could be a revolution for our planet. Sounds cool, huh? So, what are we waiting for? Grab the shovels, you might say. But there's a little problem here. Unfortunately, we haven't yet come up with anything as wildly strong and hot as the stars. To use helium-3, we need crazy temperatures and pressure. We need a thermonuclear reactor, and we have no idea how to build it, yet. And even if we could heat it up to such temperatures and get the needed pressure, we still don't really know how to handle helium-3 correctly. Therefore, even if we have an infinite amount of helium-3, we still won't be able to use it. But still, there's a great power behind helium-3, so it's not surprising that different countries have already started a race for nuclear resources. Now that Chang'e 5 has discovered a new helium-3 deposit on the nearest side of the moon, this race can become downright global. For example, China already plans a new lunar mission in 2024, Chang'e 6. During this mission, they want to collect the first samples from the far side of the moon. As you can see, finding this lunar crystal was very important for us. These crystals can help us find new ways to create helium-3. And if we manage to do that, humankind will enter a new era. But to do this, we still have to solve a number of problems. How to deliver a bunch of these lunar crystals to Earth, how to make them produce energy, and so on. Let's hope that in the future these issues will be resolved and we'll find a way to produce clean, safe, unlimited energy.